Hey everyone, this tutorial is about how to create an effective evaluation using Google Forms. I've already made an evaluation showing how to do that at a basic level, but I wanted to show how dynamic Google Forms can be in terms of the types of questions that you can make, in addition to some of the add-ons that are available through Google Forms. So one thing that I've created is an example of a bunch of different small assessments that you can do in class to differentiate your class. And I'm going to be sharing this folder with you guys, so if you'd like to, you can copy some of the examples that I have here. But if I'm doing a longer type of assessment, there are a couple things that I can add into here to make it a lot more effective. So first of all, in terms of the questions and the setup, when I'm configuring this, I want to make sure that I'm collecting email addresses, and that's very important later on when we're using particular add-ons. But if I have it set to this where I'm collecting email addresses automatically, it's going to collect them. The students aren't going to have to write their email. It will collect their email addresses as they open this form. Then I also want to make sure that it's restricted to users in St. Anne's School, in addition to them only being able to submit one response for obvious reasons. Then if I go to presentation, if I'm going to have multiple sections, which I would suggest that you have to as one of the measures to counteract cheating, if I have different sections, I have the option to show a progress bar, which will show at the top of the screen what section of the quiz they're in, as well as shuffle question order, which will shuffle the questions in each of the sections. Then finally, if I'm going to make this a quiz, that means that I can assign values to each one of the different assignments or each one of the questions, and I can have Google Forms auto-grade particular types of questions. However, if you're going to have short answer questions in here or paragraph answer questions in here, that's not something that Google Forms is going to be able to grade. So I've selected this option later after manual review. If your evaluation was only going to have multiple choice or drop down or checkbox options, then you could just release the grade immediately after submission because Google would be able to grade every one of the questions that you have. But if you have other types of questions in there, you want to have the grade released later after you've manually reviewed it. And I showed how to do this in the previous tutorial that I did on Google Forms. So once I've saved that, one of the first things that I like to do for one of the add-ons I'm going to show later is you'll see that it says that it's collecting email addresses right here. And in my first section of the quiz, I have just one section that is names. And this is a drop-down menu. Now the reason why I did this is so that this works well with two different add-ons that you might be able to use for other things. And if I go up here in the upper right-hand side where it says add-ons and I click on that, I have added these 4 add-ons to the SAS domain. So this should be available to all of you when you open your Google Forms. But if I have this first section here, I can get the Google Form to work well with Doc Appender, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, and Choice Eliminator. But instead of having student 1, student 2, and so on here, I would have the names of my actual students, and that's section 1. Now it's already collected their email address, but in this way, you don't need to have them write in their name, they just select their name from the list. And so you'll have, once you are looking through their scores, you'll see their email address in addition to their name. Then on the right-hand side here, when I'm selecting these different options, one of the options, the option on the bottom, is to add a section. If I add different sections to my quiz, then students will not be able to move on to the next section until they've completed the section that they're on. So once they've selected one of these, if I have the question is being required, then they need to put something in order to continue to the next section. But they will be able to move back to previous sections if they need to. But this is one way to break up a quiz. So students are never going to be in the same, or most likely not going to be in the exact same section at the same time if you have many sections to your quiz. I only had a couple sections in here. The first section, they put their name. But when I want to add a new section, I just press this button and it will add that new section. And if I make a mistake as to where I put it, I can drag and drop that later on. So my second section, I have automatically graded questions. And you'll see in these automatically graded questions, they have to be either the checkbox or the multiple choice option, because when I'm going into the answer key for these questions, I need to be able to choose a correct answer. So if I go to the question types here, multiple choice, checkboxes, drop down, as well as multiple choice grid and checkbox grid, Google can grade. And I have an example of each one of those in this quiz. So the first question I have here is multiple choice. And you'll notice that it's a math question. And I'm going to show how to do this in a little bit. I'm saying which one of the following graphs represents the solution to the equation below. I can create images or capture images from a document that I already have, like a previous math quiz or math test, and I can put them in here as an image. And so I'm asking which one of these graphs represents that image. And so for each one of these questions, I added an image in here. So if I were to add another option, I have this option for an image next to it. And so that's how I added each one of these. But this is multiple choice, and so I added this image, then I added these 4 images as the 4 different options that students have. And if I click on answer key, I can choose which one of those for this question, which one of these graph represents that equation. I can choose which one is correct. Then Google is going to know how to grade it. And up here, I can put a point value. So in this case, I'm going to say that this is worth 1 point. And in that way, Google's going to know whether I got 1 out of 1 or if I got 0 out of 1 for this assignment. Then something else I can do is I can add answer feedback. So when I'm adding answer feedback, I could put, if students got it correct, I could put feedback there. I can also include a link to more resources or a video. And if they got it incorrect, I could do the exact same thing. So I could put maybe what the correct answer is, and then again, put a link or a video explaining why that was incorrect. So I have that option to add answer feedback to any one of these questions. And if it's one of the ones that Google can grade, I can put that for correct or incorrect answers. So I'm not going to put anything right there right now. But once I've released the score to students, they'll be able to see that feedback for each individual question. So that's multiple choice. And in this case, I added images for the questions. Next one I had was checkbox. Now this is a checkbox grid. And so I added protons, neutrons, and electrons. And I have different options that correspond to each one of these rows here. And so when students go to answer this, I put, when I have this grid, I put which one of these were correct. So I'm going to have my rows there and my answers. Now multiple choice versus checkbox, the main difference is that with multiple choice, there's only one option to select that's true, and you'll see that in the next question. With checkbox, whether it's a normal checkbox question or it's a grid question, they can choose multiple options, but they have to get everything correct. So I made each of these 1 point, even though students would have to choose 2 options here. If they only chose one of these correct, and let's say they put this instead, okay? And I'll show you this when I'm going through the quiz later. But if they were to put that instead, now right now I'm in the answer key, so I'm selecting that as the true answer. But if students were only to get one of these correct, then they would get the whole this whole row incorrect, and they would get a 0 out of 1. So they can choose multiple options with the checkbox, but they need to have the exact options that are correct, otherwise they will not get this point, which is why I made that worth 1 point each. Multiple choice, unlike checkbox, for every single one of these rows, and you'll see I have my options here for my different rows, then what it corresponds to, there's only one correct answer. Students cannot select multiple things. So that's the difference between multiple choice and checkbox. And so in this case, for the answer key, I've already put what the correct answers are there, for the dates for each one of these battles, and I made each of these worth 1 point. Then finally down here, I have a normal checkbox question. Now remember, unlike multiple choice, they can select multiple. And so you can see, I can go to the answer key, and I made this worth 2 points. But again, in reality, a student, when it's a checkbox question, they have to get both of those in order to get this question correct. So I made this worth 2 points, and when I'm grading it, if they were only to get one of these, it's going to give them a 0. But afterwards, if you press manual review, you can go in and change that to reflect the fact that they got one of those right. And even though Google marks it as being wrong, you can change the scores afterwards. So I made this worth 2 points. And I'll show you how to correct that once we go in and do this. And again, like any of these other questions, you can add answer feedback if you want to. So I have an example of a basic multiple choice question where only one option is correct, a basic checkbox question where multiple things can be correct. In this case, it's these 2 are correct. And then I have the checkbox grid question, in which again, because it's checkbox, multiple can be correct. In this case, there's 2 correct answers for each one of these rows. And the multiple choice grid, in which case there's only one correct, but I can put a lot of different questions into one question here. And you'll notice in the answer key, I made this worth 6 points because there are 6 different options here. So each one of these is worth 1 point. So these types of questions, Google will automatically grade. Then I have questions below this that are either manually or automatically graded questions. And in this case, I have a short answer question to show you what that looks like. So for this first short answer question, I made it worth 3 points. But in the answer key, I didn't put a correct answer because I asked 3 different things in here. I asked who was the artist who cut off the lobe of his own ear and later shot himself, and then give 2 examples of this artist's famous works. So I'm talking about Van Gogh here. But if I were to add a correct answer, Google is going to look for exactly what that is, including correct spelling and upper or lowercase. And for this type of question, I'd have to put every variation of something that I think students might put, including grammatical errors and spelling errors and stuff like that. So for this type of question, I'm not going to put a correct answer. I'm not going to worry about Google grading that. And Google is going to mark it wrong regardless of what the students put. But in the manual review, you can go, it's going to say they got a 0 out of 3. You can go and reassign that point value, which I'll show you later. And again, I can add answer feedback to describe, if I wanted to put the actual answer, even though, well, in this case, they're not going to get the correct answer because it's not going to be grading it. So in the answer feedback, I could put what the correct answer to this was when students go back and are reviewing what they got right and what they got wrong. And so for questions that Google is not going to grade, this is useful for students that are going back to see why they got something wrong. Then in this second short answer question, I showed you a way that you could make a short answer graded. So in this one I asked, and I made it worth only 1 point because I'm asking one thing. The Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci is on display in which Paris museum? And so below this, in the answer key, I put Louvre with a capital L, the Louvre, I can't pronounce that, with a capital L, and then I did the exact same thing with both lowercase. And the reason why is because if I'm going to have Google Forms grade a short answer question like this, I have to put everything I think the students might put. Because if they were to spell this, for example, ER instead of RE, they'd get it wrong. And you can change their grade in the when you're going through it again in the manual review, but it's just a little bit inconvenient unless you have something very specific that you want them to answer. And you can put a couple different options here, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that Google's going to be grading this exactly, and there's no wiggle room for error there. So you can do that for short answer questions and have it auto grade them and just look at it during the manual review and make sure that it's correct. Otherwise, if you want to ask a short answer question, whatever that might be, you don't need to add a correct answer. You can add that in the answer feedback. So if they got it's going to mark it wrong regardless, but they can go into the answer feedback and see what the correct answer was and see how far they were off. And you can do the same thing with this. So I can add answer feedback and explain why they got something right or just put the correct answer here. Then finally, I have manual graded questions. This type of question, and I have a paragraph answer. Google knows that it's not going to be able to grade a paragraph answer because there's too much of a chance of what could you ask your students that they're going to spell perfectly in the exact same way that you've written it in the answer key. So if I have paragraph answer in the answer key, I don't have an option to put something here. I just have answer feedback. And so I can put what the correct answer is afterwards and describe that to students, but this is something that I have to grade manually before I return this to students. So the type of question that I put here was watch the YouTube video and provide a brief summary as to why the COVID-19 virus is so contagious. Now I added, if you look over here on the right hand side, I added a video for them to watch. But one of the issues with this type of question, if I'm going to add a video, and why I put it in its own section, besides the fact that it's manually graded, is that in one of these questions, if I were to add an image, the image is going to be a part of this question. But I can't add a video that's going to be a part of this question. So if I add a video to this page, it's going to be down here. But in the settings, if I've added that I want the question order shuffled, then when students go to this page, if you have a bunch of different questions, the video could be anywhere on this page because it's going to be in a different order for every single student. So if you're shuffling the question order, just keep that in mind. But that's why I have this question alone on its own page and they have to watch this video and then answer this question. Now, I just have this as an example because this is a relatively long video for you to be having in a quiz, but this is the type of question that is worth 4 points, and I would have to grade this afterwards and decide why they got whatever value out of 4 points, and then I could have a general answer feedback and explain, even put a rubric in if I wanted to, but explain what I was looking for a correct answer. And again, like everything else, I can attach a link here or attach a video to further explain to students what I was looking for, or to help them understand whatever that concept might be a little bit better. Then finally, at the bottom of the quiz, I added this title. And so I have right here this option for a title on the right-hand side. And if I add that title, all this is going to look like is a banner at the very end that says, "Thank you for your hard work." But I like putting a message at the end of my quiz just that they know that they're done, even though it says submit. But you can put a final little message here for them to see at the very end. Now, for the Google add-ons, the first one that I am going to show you how to do on this form is Choice Eliminator. Now, you can think of ways that you might be able to use this for particular quiz questions, but when I choose Choice Eliminator, and again, you should have this add-on in your Google Forms already, because I added it to the domain. I press Configure, and on the right-hand side, what this is going to allow me to do, gives me a little warning there, it works well with drop-down types of questions. It doesn't work as well with multiple choice. But what I can do here is I can choose one of these questions that once an option is selected, that option will disappear for the next people that are taking this form. And so if I have the student's name here, once they select their name, it's going to disappear from that list. Now that might seem like something that's unnecessary for this type of question, but you might think of a question where you might want to have an option disappear. And I haven't found it to be completely reliable, but in this case, I have the types of questions throughout this form that I can choose to have choices get eliminated from, so that students that are taking that afterwards, that are the next people to do that question, won't see that option because it's already been selected by somebody else. So the only types of questions that allows me to do that for are multiple choice, or a basic multiple choice, or a basic checkbox question, or drop-down. And so in this case, I selected my first question, which is name, and I selected it to eliminate choices. And if I look to choice options, it will tell me the amount of times, the limit that an option can be selected. So in this case, for each of these students, I have the limit, the amount of times that option can be chosen. So if I do that for this question, choices will get eliminated. And this might be useful if you guys are doing a group project or something like that, and you want students to choose from a list of a project where you don't want all the students to be doing the same thing. So you can give them a list of options in a form, send that form to them, and once a student has selected a topic, that topic will disappear from the list for the students afterwards. So again, I could do this for all 3 of these if I wanted to. Right now I'm not configuring this one to eliminate choices because that's part of the question, but I did it for this first one, and that's how Choice Eliminator works. The next add-on I wanted to show you is called Doc Appender. And what this does is it will take any submissions to my form, and I can take one of these I choose a question from here, and I can have any submission, anybody that selects student 1, for example, I can have all of their responses get recorded in a Google Doc in a particular folder that I've made in Google Drive. Now this can be useful because after a quiz, you're going to have everything saved automatically in a Google Sheet. But if you want particular questions, or if you want the entire quiz, all of the responses, to be recorded in a Google Doc, I can do it using this add-on. So you'll see here that it asked me to choose a target doc folder. Inside this folder, which I have here, and I had to make this folder, I have final exam responses. So I created this folder, and inside this folder, I want my responses to get recorded based on this first question. So what I did was I created this folder inside my Google Drive. You need to create it. And in here, I have a document for every one of my students that I have in the form. So I have student 1 through student 9. I created these. Then in my Google form, you'll see this first question, I have students 1 through 9. So I create the folder where I want the responses to go. I can create that in here, but I created it in my Google Drive and just selected it. Then I press next. And then I need to choose the question that will determine which document to append with form submissions. So I can choose from a couple of my different questions here. Again, basic questions. So the basic drop-down, basic checkbox, basic multiple choice. But in this case, I chose name, which is this first question. I don't want to include an all of the above option because that's going to add an option down here that says all of the above. But I press save and populate the selected question. Then if I press next, it's going to load the questions that I want to have saved in those documents. So here I've already selected every question I have here except for this is actually the video, so that doesn't count as a question. But I've selected them all here. So I can deselect some of these if I want to, if I don't want all of the answers to the form there. But maybe I want just the essay questions there, or just the short answer questions or something like that. Something to keep it, to be able to store it in someplace other than a Google Sheet. Then I could select the username, which is recorded automatically when students take this form, and their name. And I can choose down here how I want that formatted. So I can have separate bulleted lists, which I kind of like how that looks, separate vertical tables, or rows in a single horizontal table. So I've selected, or I'm going to select separate bulleted lists. And I press save. Now, when students pick one of these, find their list in this, or find their name in this list, and they select that and go to the next question, it's automatically going to know, okay, once the student submits, all of those responses go into the document for student 1, or student 2, or student 3. And so that's how Doc Appender works. And I will show you how that looks live in a little bit. Then finally, the last two add-ons I have here are to limit form submissions. So these two work differently, but the way Form Limiter works is it creates a hard limit for form submissions. So if I were to set this up, it gives me the option to set limit here. And I have a couple different options when I'm going to select a limit. So I have date and time, number of form responses, or a spreadsheet value. So I can do it from a spreadsheet value, but that's kind of a little bit more complicated. But let's say I say a specific date and time. So I'm going to choose for this one, let's say May 5th at 2:30 p.m. And I press set. I can choose, and then once the submissions are closed, I can customize this message if I want to. Press save and enable. And now, by that date, as soon as that date is reached, the form, this form is closed. Students cannot submit any more responses. So there's another application called Timify Me that's a little bit more flexible. This option is not flexible. Once I am past 2:30, I cannot submit that form. So if you want to create a hard limit for your students, then use Form Limiter, because once you get to this time at this date, the form submissions shut down and students cannot respond to this form anymore. The final one is called Timify Me. And this one's a little bit more difficult, but this one is also more flexible, but you need to go to an outside site. It doesn't just work within Google Forms. So if I were to click on Timify Me and press configure, it's going to change some of my settings, but if I press enable add-on for this form, the emails are not going to be collected automatically. Students are going to need to write in their email, otherwise the app wouldn't work. But once I enable the app, or this add-on for Google Forms, I need to go to my Timify Me dashboard, and I would need to sign in here. So you can see I'm signed in with my school account. You would need to create an account. Once I have this enabled, I need to change my configurations or toggle my configurations from the dashboard. So if I go to the dashboard, now for this form, I have it enabled. And if I go to Timify Me, that final exam, that form is here because I enabled it. And once you've enabled Timify in one of your forms, it's going to appear here in your dashboard. So you go to timify.me and you sign in with your account. And you'll have all of your forms here that you've enabled that add-on to auto-populate here. So I had the final exam. I just went through and showed you all those different questions. And right here, you can see where I was practicing with it. But when I want to use this, I have to press Create Tests, and I choose who my respondents are going to be. So let's say that I use my own account. So I have John Carmichael, sas.edu.py. So I would need to send this to every one of my students. And if you press comma, you could add multiple students at the same time. And then I have to choose what the duration is of this test. So let's say it is 15 minutes. Now, what's different about Time and Find Me is that 15-minute limit starts whenever students decide to start the form. So you really would have to use the form limiter in conjunction with Time and Find Me, because the form limiter would give you a hard time when the form closes. This one doesn't close until that time limit is over. So let's say I made this 15 minutes long. Or let's say I make it a little bit longer. So I make it 30 minutes long. Down here, I have this option that says auto close form when time is over. Now, if I do this, this is going to do the same thing as the form limiter. So if I press this, as soon as the time is over, remember, whenever they started it is when that time starts. Whenever the time is over, it's going to close it and they cannot submit it anymore, and it's not going to record their answers. So if they were working on this quiz right up until the very limit, then they're going to lose everything they've done. So what I would do is I would uncheck this. This is going to allow them to go over time, and you're going to see that they've gone over time. But you can still set a hard limit for when this ends with form limiter. You can use both at the same time. So let's say I made this 30 minutes and I press create here. Now I have this new test here that is for my email account. And the limit that I have here, if I created this for every single one of my students, so I added all my students' emails in there, I'm going to see all of their usernames here. And I have a URL next to every single username. So it's unlimited for you to use those URLs and to have students go through the URL in order for them to take the test. And that timer starts whenever they open the link. So I could do it that way. But one thing that I can also do is I can send the tests. This you do have a limit for, so keep that in mind. If I wanted to send the tests, I have a quota of 99. So when I send these tests out, and I can send them in bulk, so for this test I would have all of the options here of the different people that I added. I can select all, in this case I have all my students there, and I can send this to them. And that's going to send them an email, I can send them a message with that. And if I press next and send those tests, now if I go to my email account, and I sent one of these to me before, it's giving me a warning about something else. So here I have the email, and in here I can open the form and I can complete my test. And as soon as I press this button, the timer starts. But in this case, if I had not selected that option for it to auto close once the timer is hit, then you'll see that down here I have green and green. There's these two colors on the left-hand side. That means that I finished in time, whatever time I was allotted. The yellow means that I finished with overtime. So in this case, I finished in 6 minutes for a test that I was supposed to have finished in 5 minutes. So I went overtime because I didn't select that option. This red one is because the time was over and I had it selected to automatically close when the time was up. And so if you don't select that option, you can allow them to go overtime if you want to, and they would know that they're overtime, but they'd still be able to submit if they're overtime. And you can still use form limiter to create a hard limit on when that quiz or test actually closes and they cannot submit anymore. So I would suggest that you go with overtime here. But one thing to keep in mind, like I said before, is that Time to Find Me does not have a specific end time. So you can't say that it's going to be over at like 2 o'clock, for example. For Time to Find Me, it's within that certain amount of time. So if you set it for a half an hour, but the student starts their test at night instead of starting it when you wanted them to start it, they're still going to be able to work on that test, even though they're not taking it at the time that you wanted them to take it. So the form limiter gives them a hard ending to the quiz, where you can let them know that there's that hard ending, and after that there's no submission, but you can allow them to go over time with Time to Find Me. And what's cool about this is, if I were to copy this URL, or if I were to enter through here, I could share that URL with them through Classroom. And if I go to the URL, it's going to look like this. It says I have 30 minutes to complete this quiz. And if I open the form, I'm going to have a timer up here that tells me how much time I have left. And remember that as soon as I start getting close to time being up, it's going to start blinking and going red. And then if I have not selected that option where it's going to close automatically, then it'll turn orange and it'll say that I am over time. And you could still have that hard limit for form limiter at a particular time to close the form anyway if they're going over time. So if I were to go through some of these questions, just to show you what they look like after I've done all the adjustments and put all those add-ons. So if I put my email address in, I choose which student I am. So let's say I'm student 1, press next. And I have all these different options here. So I'm going to put something randomly. I have this first multiple choice option. Remember, I need to choose at least one per row. I have this question, the math question, where I inserted the images for students. So which of the following graphs represents the solution to this equation? So I can select one. That's a basic multiple choice question. Then I have the checkbox grid. So I'm going to say both of these are inside the nucleus. This is positive, neutral. This one's outside the nucleus. And these two are written by Shakespeare. Then I go to the next section. And remember, students are going to be on different sections at the same time, which makes it more difficult to cheat. So I go next. Then I have these two questions. Remember, this one I am having a Google Forms grade because it's a very simple answer. So I'm going to put Louvre, which is one of the options that I had. And here I'm just going to put Van Gogh. And then for the last question, I'm going to put, I don't know. And remember that all of these were required. So you can see I have my timer here. I'm going to press submit. It says, here's that title. It says, thank you for the hard work. I press submit. And now, if I were to refresh this, in Timify Me in my dashboard, it's going to say that I finished in time, and it's going to say what my score is. But remember that this score is only reflecting what Google Forms was able to auto-grade. So now, if I were to go back to my form and go to responses, I have set this so that I'm not releasing the grade automatically. I'm manually grading it. So if I go through here, I have the first section here. I got this one correct because I selected the correct answer, so it says 1 out of 1. I got this correct. I got some correct here, some wrong here. Remember, Google can grade these because I can select a very specific answer to something. Down here, I got these two correct. But remember, in order for me to get a 2 out of 2 here, I need to get both correct here. If I were only to have gotten one of these correct, then this is going to say 0, and I would need to go in and change it to 1, for example. And then I could press save. I changed this one to 1, even though that's not correct. In this case, it's 2. But you can, if you allow yourself to be able to manually change these, I can change the score afterwards. Then down for this one, I got Van Gogh. So this was a 3-part question. Remember, I had 2 short answers here. One that was auto-graded by Google and one that was not. And so this one I got correct because I wrote in one of the correct spellings of the correct answer that I put as a possible answer. So I got that correct, and Google was able to grade that. But for this one, I asked 3 different things. And I can't write in all the correct answers or variations or orders in which students might answer this question. So for a short answer question that's more complex, I can't have Google grade that. So here I put Van Gogh, and that's partially correct. But I have 3 questions here. So up here, I could put a 1 out of 3. And Google's going to ask me to save that. But then before I release this to students, I can change the grades. And then down to this last answer, I put I don't know, so that's going to be a 0. And so I've now graded this, and if I wanted to, I could return this to students. But if I'm grading these on an individual basis, if you remember when I was setting this up, I was able to add group feedback to every single one of these questions. And I would see those here for correct or incorrect answers. But when I'm manually grading these answers as well, I can add individual feedback. So if I wanted to, for this question, to add individual feedback, I could explain to them why they only got a 1 out of 3. Or down here, for this paragraph answer, let's say I wrote more than I don't know, I could explain to them why they got the grade that they got. or attach a rubric even if I wanted to. So it really is flexible in terms of the types of feedback that you can provide. And you can do that on an individual basis, or you can do that for the class as a whole when you're setting the actual quiz up. The final thing that I wanted to show you guys was how to create one of these math questions. Now this could work for other types of questions as well, but I have to insert images in here that the students can then select the correct option from. So each one of these is an image. And the way that I created these was using two different applications. Now, Jose told me about one that is an add-on that works with Google Forms. I couldn't get it to work for mine, but if you go in the Chrome Web Store, this extension called Equate.io, if you were to add it in, it has the same function as the two that I'm about to show you. But there are some limitations to this application, and you have to apply as a teacher in order for it to work. Now, I did that, and it worked for a little bit, and then it didn't work for me, but it might work for you. But if this doesn't work for you, or if you'd like to have a different option, then two other ones I used to create both of these types of effects the first one is an application to create equations like this that I can then insert in as an image. So what I did to create this was I used an application called CodeCogs, and this is on a website. So in here, I can use the different functions that they have here in order to create an equation here, and when I modify this equation, I can see what it's actually going to look like as an image down below. So if I were to write my equations in here, it's going to create an image for me that I can then download. And once I've downloaded that image in the form, if I press the image next to the question option, or as a part of the question itself, I press the image button, press browse, and then you find wherever it was downloaded on your computer. And so I just downloaded this. So it's going to be in my downloads folder. I click on that option. And now I can see for this question, I added the image, so I can see x to the 6th power there. And I can say that that is option E, for example. And now I will have that there, just like I inserted an equation up here. And that goes for any type of question if you want to insert an image in. But for math, again, I used CodeCogs, and that allows me to create an equation to either for my question or to add options for a specific answer. The way that I added these graphs in was I used something called GeoGebra, geogebra.org, and you have to create an account here, but if you do this, then I can do the same thing, and I can add in a particular equation in here, and then I can have this graph either as the question itself, or as a possible multiple choice answer. And so when I'm done with this, and I've got the graph that I want to have, I can press on this share button, and I'll have a couple of options here, so I can copy the link if I want to. What I really want is to export that image. So if I export that image, it's going to look like this, which I think is kind of big, but it's going to look like this. I can download that, and then just as before, I can add in, let's say I want to add that image instead. I go to Browse, go to my downloads, it's right here, and I can insert that graph in as an image for this question. So I have that down there, I have the graph in there as one of the possible answers. However, if you look at what I have in there, it's kind of big. And so when you create these things, whether you're creating it here, an equation, or whether you're creating a graph, a shortcut that I have on Windows is to press Windows Shift S, and the Windows button looks like a little window. If I press Windows Shift S, then I have the option to select a particular part of the screen. And that's like a screenshot. So when I do that, it's going to save that to my clipboard down here. I click on that. And then in the upper right-hand corner here, I could write on this if I wanted to, but in the upper right-hand corner, I press Save. I decide where I'm going to save that. So let's say I save that in Pictures. And again, if I go to my form, say get rid of this. And for this question, I add an image. I browse. This time I saved it in Pictures. It's right here under Annotation. So I press on that. And that's going to upload the image that I just screenshot that's a little bit smaller. Well, a little bit closer to the actual graph. So it's not a huge graph with a small function in there. I can actually see it pretty well. So that's a way that I can either copy something that I've created here. Again, I can download this image if I want, but I can also, in the exact same way, do a screenshot here and select that, and then save it and upload it just like I showed you I did for the graph. And that's also useful because if you have a previous test that you already have digitally, you already have in Google Drive or on your computer, you can go on that quiz and look at a question you had previously. So one of your finals from last year, for example, you just need to screenshot the equation you're using for the question using the Windows Shift S, and you could just capture that specific equation and then insert it as a question or as one of the options. So that's a way that we can create math questions inside Google Forms, and that's the way that I created this question. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. We're going to be working on this during the professional development that we have later this month. But if you have any questions when you're working on your final exams, or if you need any help, or if you want either me or any other member of the CIT to check your tests before they're ready to be sent to your students, just let us know. And I'm going to share with you guys the practice final exam that I was using for this video to view, so you guys can see that, and if you wanted to, make a copy of it, as well as examples of other Google Forms for shorter assessments that you can use on a more regular basis in class that you can also make a copy of to differentiate some of the stuff the students are learning in class. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know if you guys have any other questions or if you think that a more in-depth tutorial of any of the tools I showed today would be helpful.